Part 1, The Suspicion. Athena had it all. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. A lavish penthouse in Manhattan, designer clothes that wrapped around her like a second skin, and a husband, James, who was both powerful and dangerously charming. They had been married for 5 years with 5 years of grand gestures, weekend getaways to Paris, and expensive jewelry that glittered like the promises he whispered into her ear late at night. But deep down, Athena knew. She had seen the signs. The subtle change in his cologne. The way he suddenly became more protective over his phone, as if it held the world's most valuable secret. The occasional dinner meetings that stretched late into the night, leaving her to fall asleep alone in their massive bed. At first, she told herself she was imagining things. But then came the lipstick. A deep crimson stain, smeared on the collar of his white shirt. It wasn't hers, she hadn't worn red lipstick in months. She confronted him that night, standing in their dimly lit bedroom, the city skyline stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. James barely flinched. Instead, he laughed. "Athena, you're being ridiculous," he said smoothly, unbuttoning his shirt. It was probably from a client at the gala. "You know how those events are." She wanted to believe him. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. Part 2, The Investigation Begins. Athena wasn't the type to sit and cry. If James was playing a game, she would play it better. She hired a private investigator, an ex-cop named Marcus, who had seen enough broken marriages to know the truth long before the evidence arrived. Within a week, he handed her an envelope. Inside were photographs. James. A woman. A brunette with legs for days, stepping into his black Mercedes. Dinners at upscale restaurants. A weekend at a secluded beach house. The final image burned into Athena's mind: James, standing in a dimly lit hotel hallway, his hand on the small of the woman's back, his lips dangerously close to hers. She felt nothing. No tears. No anger. Just a strange, eerie calm. James had no idea what was coming for him. Part 3, The Perfect Revenge. Athena didn't scream. She didn't break things. Instead, she smiled. She played the role of the devoted wife flawlessly. She planned a grand anniversary dinner, inviting all of James' closest friends, business partners, and, of course, his mistress. The evening was set in an exclusive rooftop venue. Candlelit tables, a live string quartet, and champagne flowing like water. James was the center of attention, laughing, toasting, completely unaware that his world was about to crumble. Athena stood up, tapping her glass. The room fell silent. "I just want to say how grateful I am for these 5 years," she began, her voice smooth as silk. "James, you have given me everything I could ever ask for. And tonight, I want to give you something in return." A server stepped forward, placing an envelope in front of him. James frowned. "What's this?" "Open it," she whispered. Inside were the photographs. The entire room watched as his face drained of color. His hands trembled as he flipped through the images, the realization hitting him like a freight train. Whispers spread like wildfire. His business partners exchanged glances. His friends looked away, embarrassed. "And the brunette?" She gasped, covering her mouth, realizing she was no longer just a secret. Athena leaned in, her lips brushing against his ear. "We're done." Then, without another word, she walked away. Part 4, The Aftermath. The divorce was brutal, for him. Athena had been smart. Every asset was tied to her name. The penthouse? Hers. The stocks? Hers. The business connections? Hers. James was left with nothing but the bitter taste of betrayal, his own. As Athena stood on her balcony weeks later, sipping a glass of wine, she felt nothing but freedom. Because in the end, the best revenge wasn't anger. It was moving on. And she did, flawlessly. Part 5, a new game begins. James had lost everything. His business partners cut ties, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. His credit cards were frozen, his reputation shattered. Even the mistress, the one he had risked it all for, disappeared the moment she realized his wealth and influence were gone. But James wasn't the type to stay down. He knew Athena had one, but he also knew her better than anyone. She loved power, and she loved control. That's why she orchestrated his downfall so flawlessly. And if there was one thing James despised, it was losing. So he planned his return. Part 6, the shadows of the past. Athena, however, had moved on. She didn't just divorce James, she erased him. Every trace of their life together was wiped clean. The penthouse had been remodeled. The business empire he once ran? She absorbed it effortlessly, proving she had been the true mastermind all along. And now, she had a new distraction. Nathaniel Pierce. A billionaire investor, known for his ruthless tactics and irresistible charm. He pursued Athena with a fire that James never had. Their relationship was electric, intense, passionate, dangerously addictive. For the first time in years, Athena felt alive. But James wasn't done with her. One evening, as she stepped into her penthouse, a familiar voice echoed from the shadows. "Did you miss me?" Athena froze. Her fingers instinctively tightened around her designer clutch. James stepped forward, dressed in a sleek black suit, his expression unreadable. He looked different, leaner, sharper, more dangerous. "How the hell did you get in here?" she asked, keeping her tone steady. He smirked, stepping closer. "You of all people should know, doors don't keep people like me out." Athena narrowed her eyes. "Get out before I call security." James chuckled. "Go ahead. But first, you might want to check the headlines." With a slow, deliberate motion, he pulled out his phone and handed it to her. Athena's heart stopped. The screen displayed a news article, a breaking scandal involving Nathaniel Pierce. Fraud. Embezzlement. Corruption. Every major media outlet was covering it. And the final line of the article sent a chill down her spine. Exclusive leaks provided by a close, anonymous source. Athena's blood ran cold. She lifted her gaze to James, who was now watching her with a knowing smile. "Consider this payback," he whispered. Part 7, the war between us. Athena never lost. Not to men like James. But she had underestimated him. Nathaniel was finished, his empire crumbling overnight. And James? He was making a comeback, reclaiming everything she had taken from him, one calculated move at a time. But Athena wasn't about to let him win. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was war. And Athena always played to destroy. Part 8, Fire with Fire. Athena stared at the screen, her fingers gripping the phone tightly. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind, but one thing was crystal clear: James had just declared war. Slowly, she handed the phone back to him, her expression unreadable. "You think this changes anything?" she said, her voice smooth, controlled. James chuckled, slipping the phone into his pocket. "Oh, it changes everything. You built an empire on control, Athena. But now? Now you've lost it." Athena took a step closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "You always did mistake chaos for victory. But let me remind you, if you play with fire, I'll make sure you burn." James smirked, leaning in slightly. "I've already burned, darling. The real question is, can you survive the flames?" For a long moment, neither of them moved. This wasn't about love anymore. Not about betrayal either. This was about dominance. And only one of them would walk away as the true winner. Part 9, the first strike. Athena wasted no time. The next morning, her team was already at work, her lawyers, her PR specialists, her fixers. The scandal that James had unleashed would not be ignored, but it could be redirected. Within 24 hours, headlines began to shift. Anonymous sources question legitimacy of Nathaniel Pierce scandal. Ex-wife of James Caldwell speaks out, claims malicious targeting. Was this all a setup? And just like that, the narrative began to change. James watched it unfold, sipping his whiskey with an amused smirk. "She's fast," he murmured, setting the glass down. A voice behind him chuckled. "You expected anything less?" James turned to see Elias Vaughn, one of the most feared corporate manipulators in the game. A man who had his own reasons for wanting to see Athena fall. "You said you wanted to take her down," Elias said, sitting across from him. "I can help you do that. But you need to decide, are you here for revenge? Or to win?" James's eyes darkened. "I don't want revenge," he said. "I want everything she has." Elias smiled. "Then let's get to work." Part 10, the game is on. Athena sat in her private office, watching the news unfold. James thought he could shake her. Thought he could break her. He had no idea what he was up against. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. She answered. "Speak." A deep voice responded. "He's moving. And he's not alone." Athena smirked. "Let him come." She hung up and leaned back in her chair, a dangerous glint in her eyes. James had started this war. But Athena? She was going to end it. Part 11, checkmate. The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond Athena's floor-to-ceiling windows. Night had fallen, but she wasn't looking at the stars. She was watching the battlefield, the world that she and James had turned into a chessboard. A notification flashed on her screen. Breaking news: James Caldwell steps down amidst corporate investigation. She exhaled slowly, the corner of her lips curving into a victorious smirk. It had taken weeks, but every move he made, she had anticipated. Every trick he played, she had countered. She hadn't just won. She had destroyed him. James stormed into her office without knocking, his once confident swagger reduced to a frustrated glare. "You really did it," he muttered. His voice was rough, edged with something dangerously close to admiration. Athena stood, walking towards him with the same calm, calculated grace that had made her unstoppable. "You underestimated me," she said, stopping just inches away. "You thought you could break me. But, darling, you were playing checkers while I was playing chess." James exhaled a bitter laugh. "And now what? You win, and I just disappear?" Athena tilted her head, her eyes glinting in the dim light. "No, James. You don't disappear. You stay right where you are, watching me thrive. That's your punishment." Silence stretched between them. For a moment, it was like before, the tension, the heat, the undeniable connection. But then James smirked. A slow, knowing smirk. "You think this is over?" His voice was low, teasing. "You may have won this round, Athena. But we both know, wars never truly end." She leaned in slightly, just enough for him to catch the faintest scent of her perfume. "You're right," she whispered. "That's why I'll always be 10 steps ahead." And with that, she turned, walking away without looking back. James watched her go, his jaw tightening. She had beaten him. This time. But the game between them? It was far from over. Part 12, the final move. James stood in Athena's office, the weight of defeat pressing against him, but something in his eyes flickered, something dangerous. She had beaten him. Publicly. Brutally. But James wasn't the kind of man who simply walked away. As Athena poured herself a glass of whiskey, her phone buzzed. A single message flashed on the screen. "Checkmate?" "Not yet." "Jay." Her grip on the glass tightened. She turned back to James, who was already halfway to the door, his silhouette outlined against the city lights. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" she mused, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. James glanced over his shoulder. "I don't believe in endings, Athena. Only new beginnings." She exhaled a soft chuckle, walking toward her desk and unlocking a drawer. Inside lay a single manila folder, a file she had hoped she'd never need. But James had just changed the rules. She pulled it out and set it on the desk with a quiet thud. "Then let's start a new game," she murmured. James smirked. "Thought you'd never ask." He stepped out, the door closing softly behind him. Athena stared at the file for a long moment before finally flipping it open. Inside, everything she needed to destroy him. And yet, as she traced her fingers over the pages, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. Because deep down, she knew the truth. She didn't just want to win. She wanted to watch James fight back. After all, what was a queen without a king to challenge her? Part 13, The Queen's Gambit. Athena closed the file, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about something deeper. Something darker. James wanted a war? Fine. But she was going to rewrite the rules. 1 week later, the invitation arrived without a sender's name. Just an elegant, embossed card. Private event, exclusive guest list. Tonight, 9 p.m. Penthouse at the Astoria. James smirked as he read it. Athena's move. Finally. When he arrived at the penthouse, the air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and aged whiskey. Powerful men and women mingled, but his eyes were only on her. Athena stood near the grand piano, dressed in a sleek, black silk gown that clung to her like sin. She held a glass of wine, swirling it absently, her gaze already locked onto him before he even made it across the room. "James." Her voice was smooth, almost amused. "Athena," he replied, taking a slow sip of his drink. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" She smiled, a slow, calculated smile. "I just wanted to remind you." She leaned in slightly, her lips a breath away from his ear. "I don't play fair." James barely had time to react before a hush fell over the room. A massive screen lit up, displaying something that should not exist: confidential company emails, secret transactions, and documents that could bury him alive. His jaw clenched. He turned to her. "You really want to do this here?" Athena sipped her wine. "You thought you could play me, James?" She tilted her head. "I invented this game." The tension between them crackled like fire. James leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek. "You know what I love about you, Athena," he murmured. She arched a brow. "Enlighten me." "You don't want to destroy me," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You want to see if I can survive you." She smirked, placing her glass down. "Guess we'll find out, won't we?" And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving James grinning in the chaos she had just unleashed.